Action figure. Oh, hi. Didn't see you there. Now that the cliched intro is out of the way, I'd like to welcome you to episode 1 of my Star Wars book retrospective series. In this series, I hope to examine a different, Star Wars book every episode, analyze its pitfalls, analyze what's good about it, analyze everything, basically. Today, I'd like to take a look at this, which has a really long-winded name that I can't remember. The original Marvel Years, Legends, Epic, Volume 1, Star Collection, something. I don't care enough. I have done extensive research on the subject of these comics. And I found that these comics started off as just a adaptation of the film as a way to promote it, much like the novelization. However, they eventually moved into telling original stories and continued on to covering episodes 5 and 6. And the comic actually lasted until 1986, telling original stories. Along with Splinter of the Mind's Eye and such, these were some of the first ever Star Wars Expanded Universe stories. And that's really reflected in the design, the stories they choose to tell, and the characters. Firstly, with the design, obviously, there's all these bright and outlandish colors throughout the galaxy. They look really out of place. Everything looks like Candyland. Remember the grape gumdrop mountains of Tatooine? Yeah, me neither. The colors are all really weird on the planets, except for this not Hoth ice planet, which actually looks pretty cool. All the lightsabers are red for whatever reason. I suspect for printing purposes. Interestingly, like with Tatooine and the lightsaber example, these were changed in later reprints. Say this other Dark Horse adaptation, or reprint of the A New Hope adaptation. The Death Star is no longer operated for Pride Month, am I right? Obi-Wan's lightsaber is blue instead of red. While it does feel more natural to Star Wars, it does take away a bit of its charm. However, the color palette isn't the only anachronism to these comics. Let's talk about character. All the reappearing characters all feel personality-wise like they did in the films, except for, Chewbacca. I don't think anyone at Marvel really got Chewbacca for a while, you know? He's portrayed as like this lumbering beast. It's in his very nature to, attack people. But, it's not really who he is, at least not in the later movies. Han Solo says he pulls, droids' arms out of their socket, but we don't actually see him do it. He's a really kind-hearted, at least in the movies. All the returning characters look less like the actors in this. Even if they do feel personality-wise like the characters, they look less like them and more like generic archetypes, I guess. Chewbacca looks kind of like Bigfoot, which I guess is appropriate for his personality. I don't know. Princess Leia especially kind of looks like a Barbie or like her action figure. Luke looks sort of like Flash Gordon or like a swashbuckler or something, unless Mark Hamill. But some of the oddest showings in the character department include the original Marvel characters. Some of the most notable ones appear in the first multi-issue arc that isn't an adaptation, featuring Han Solo's Star Hoppers of Aduba 3. Let's not forget that this is the first appearance of, yes, that's right, the rabbit, the legend, the meme, Jaxon. For those unfamiliar with the deepest trenches of Star Wars lore, Jaxon is a 2-meter tall, about 6 feet for my fellow Americans, green, carnivorous rabbit humanoid. What's Han Solo paying him? Carrots? I am extremely sorry for the hurtful remarks I made about the honorable Lepus carnivorous species. Leppy for short. Which they ain't. I am sincerely sorry if you were at all offended by what I said. The goal of my content is always to entertain. I never meant any offense to anyone. Anyway, let's get back to reading some comics. It's a great temperature. Another character who seems very out of place is Don Juan Quixote, the last of the Jedi Knights, at least as he said. Oddly enough, he's portrayed as just a literal medieval knight with a lightsaber, or light sabre, as they insist on calling it until issue 12 or so.
And this is gonna be a good day for Dundon Mifflin and Sabre.
Saber.
The comic implies, basically tells us that he's not actually a Jedi and just some crazy guy who thinks he's a Jedi. I'm still a little confused on that fact, though, so I don't know if this is continuity breaking or not. He speaks in faux Shakespearean English, like a knight. Fie! This development doth confound me so. Although, I guess I can't really complain. I do own all the currently available Shakespeare Star Wars books. Amaza is yet another character from this arc. But what makes her interesting under an analytic lens is that she's mostly defined by stereotypically feminine attributes. Her clothes are revealing and she's stubborn and disobedient. This is what the writers thought women, just all women were probably. I don't know. Not to insult anyone in particular. Obviously they're very talented, but it's very clear that there's some outdated politics there. There's a quote here. Amaza is wanted dead or alive in 6 star systems, and it isn't for the way she threads a needle. Woman. So. Also, this comic might have predicted Tumblr. There's this woman pirate with short purple hair who is specifically described as a man-hater. The stories here feel sort of like generic sci-fi and less like Star Wars. I have the feeling that no one really got Star Wars like they didn't get, Chewbacca, like I was saying earlier. They just, I don't know. They just feel sort of like generic sci-fi, like the story about Han Solo and cyborg racism. I swear, Star Wars number 7. They feel like they could be in any sci-fi book, and not necessarily, a Star Wars one. At one point, the gang travels to a water world and meets what I can only describe as, pirates. Now, obviously, space pirates are an accepted part of Star Wars, with Hondo, and in this comic, Crimson Jack, they are featured. But these are, nautical pirates. Interestingly enough, their leader, who looks like Peter Griffin, tells Luke about the Jedi a little and how they forced his father to that planet. In conclusion, I think these stories are kind of interesting just because, it's kind of an interesting experience to see what Star Wars was like, even before Empire came out. It'd be interesting to see, what people, thought the Jedi were like, although we don't get to see much of that, but, we get to see what kind of stories they were able to tell with Luke Skywalker and the rest of the Star Warriors. you know, they weren't really restricted by anything. They just kind of told what stories they wanted to tell, and it's kind of interesting to see before a lot of the major aspects of the Star Wars galaxy got fleshed out and everything, what they had to work with and what stories they could tell with that. This was really hard to get through, though. It's 475 pages, and most of it is really long and drawn out. I did not really enjoy most of the 23 issues of the actual Marvel Star Wars comic. You know, the actual issue, the book called Star Wars. I just didn't really enjoy it much. It seemed really, really long and drawn out, and I thought it was really boring. And in fact, like, I split this up, like, I delayed so much, and it took me just so long to read through this just because I really didn't want to. Because it was just so drawn out and so boring, honestly. Like, I can see the merit. It's interesting to see this through an academic lens, but, like, I just couldn't really find myself invested in it. There are some later 3-page stories, which are not from the comic called Star Wars. They're republished, I think, from, it says, Pizzazz and Star Wars Weekly. And I like those better. Those are more quickly paced. They have a bit more action, you know. They aren't super drawn out. And they're able to tell a cohesive story with, you know, the limits, kind of like the 2003 Clone Wars cartoon, I guess. But there's just so many levels of Star Wars references. Yeah, really to conclude, you know, it's kind of interesting through an academic lens, but, you know, a lot of it I didn't really enjoy. Thanks for tuning in. I'll probably get another video out later this month. Probably reviewing another one of these books on my shelves. I'm thinking this one maybe. Thank you for tuning in. If you have tuned in, if you're in the future or whatever, just like, I don't know. God, I'm rambling. I forgot what I wrote in the script. Well, again, thank you for watching. I've had a really good time here. I'd like to do this again. Hopefully reviewing a better book.